The faint glow of neon lights flickered against the dark sky as Jason parked his old pickup truck in front of Miller's Pub, a small bar just off Highway 74 in North Carolina. It wasn't much, just a spot for locals, truckers, and tired travelers seeking a cold drink and a quiet place to unwind. Jason, who had just returned from a military deployment a week ago, was looking forward to a peaceful moment before diving back into the grind of everyday life. Pushing open the creaky door, Jason walked in and was greeted by the buzz of conversation and the sound of an old jukebox playing some Johnny Cash. He scanned the room, taking in the familiar faces, a couple of regulars playing pool, a group chatting at the bar, and a few solitary drinkers lost in their own thoughts. He wasn't here to make friends, just to relax. He chose a corner table in the back, out of the way, but with a clear view of the room. His military uniform blended in with the dim light, except for his worn sneakers, chosen for comfort over style. Jason ordered a glass of water, quietly sipping it as his mind wandered to the family he was finally going to see after months away. He thought about his mom's cooking and his niece's excited voice. But the sound of the door slamming open pulled him out of his thoughts. A group of 6 men walked in, their heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor. They were older, their leather jackets covered with patches and insignia that showed they were veterans. They were loud, laughing and slapping each other on the back as they made their way to the bar. Jason gave them a quick glance before returning to his drink. But one of the men, the leader, didn't just glance back. He was a big guy with a salt and pepper beard and sharp eyes. He stopped mid-laugh when he noticed Jason. He muttered something to his group, and soon all of them were looking at Jason. The chatter quieted, replaced by a tense feeling that slowly spread through the room. Jason felt their stares but didn't react. He'd been through this before, the kind of look that sizes you up and judges you without knowing anything about you. He took a sip of his water, trying to focus on the jukebox instead of the growing discomfort in the air. At the bar, the group huddled closer, their voices low but sharp. The leader whispered something, and one of the men chuckled, casting a look at Jason. Jason stayed calm, his posture relaxed, but his senses were on high alert. He'd learned long ago to stay composed under pressure. Years of military service had taught him that. Still, he couldn't ignore the weight of their gaze. What started as a simple getaway for Jason was about to take a turn he hadn't expected. The steady hum of the jukebox was drowned out by the heavy sound of boots as a group of men headed toward his table. The leader, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, was at the front, his eyes locked on Jason, sizing him up like a predator, stalking its prey. Jason felt the change in the room even before they reached him. The once lively chatter grew noticeably quieter. The bartender stopped pouring, and the regulars looked up, their eyes wary. Jason set his glass down and leaned back, his calm exterior hiding the alertness that had already settled into his muscles. "Hey," the leader growled, stopping just a few feet from Jason. His voice was rough and filled with disdain. "Nice uniform. Where'd you get it? A Halloween store?" The men behind him chuckled, their laughter thick with mockery. Jason looked up, his expression unchanged. He'd heard worse, much worse. "It's mine," Jason said evenly. "Earned it." The leader raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Earned it, huh? That's funny. I've seen plenty of real soldiers, and none of them wear sneakers with their fatigues. You trying to play dress up for sympathy? Or maybe for a free drink?" Jason's jaw tightened just slightly, but his voice stayed steady. "I don't need sympathy or free drinks. I'm just here to enjoy my evening." The leader smirked, leaning in closer. His beer-soaked breath invaded Jason's space. "You don't look like any soldier to me," he sneered. "Where's your boots, your tags? Hell, you probably don't even know how to salute properly." One of the men behind him added, "Bet he couldn't tell us the first thing about basic training." Another chimed in, probably never seen a battlefield in his life. The group burst into laughter again, their voices harsh against the low hum of the jukebox. Jason remained silent, his gaze moving between the men. He wasn't intimidated, but he wasn't about to make things worse either. Years of service had taught him how to pick his battles. But something about this encounter got under his skin. It wasn't just their words. It was the sheer audacity, the ignorance. "I don't need to prove anything to you," Jason said finally, his voice calm but firm. The leader, now visibly annoyed by Jason's calmness, stepped closer, his large frame looming over the table. "You think you're some kind of hero, huh?" he sneered. "Walking in here like you belong? I don't think you do." The room seemed to hold its breath. Jason locked eyes with the man, unwavering. "I've served 3 tours overseas," Jason said, his voice steady but with a sharp edge. "And I don't need your approval to belong anywhere." For a moment the laughter stopped. The leader hesitated, his bravado faltering under the weight of Jason's words. But pride wouldn't let him back down. He scoffed and shot back, "Yeah? Prove it. Show us your tags or you're nothing but a liar." Jason's eyes flicked to the rest of the group, noticing their uneasy glances. They weren't as sure about their leader's accusations anymore, but none of them dared speak up. He exhaled slowly, resisting the urge to escalate things. "I don't owe you proof," Jason said, his tone calm but firm, "but if you think starting something here is a good idea, I'd suggest you think again." The tension in the room was thick. The bartender's hand hovered near the phone, ready to call for help. The other patrons shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Jason and the group. Yet the leader didn't move. Instead, his smirk returned, sharper and more menacing than before. "You've got a smart mouth," he growled, his voice low and threatening. "Let's see if it's as quick as your fists." The moment hung in the air, tight as a wire, ready to snap. The leader's smirk deepened as he lunged, reaching for Jason's collar. His movement was sloppy, more driven by his arrogance than skill, but it was enough to set things in motion. Jason didn't think. His training kicked in. With a swift, precise motion, he sidestepped the grab, catching the man's wrist mid-air. In one smooth motion, he twisted the arm behind the leader's back, using his weight to push him forward, pinning him face first against the edge of the table. The leader let out a strangled yelp of pain, his bravado vanishing in an instant. The bar erupted in gasps and murmurs as the remaining bikers froze, their wide eyes fixed on their immobilized leader. For a moment, no one moved. Jason's voice broke through the stunned silence, low and controlled, yet carrying undeniable authority. "I told you to think twice before starting something." He leaned in slightly, his grip firm but not excessive. "You don't know who you're messing with." The leader struggled against Jason's hold, but it was useless. The soldier's calm, efficient grip left no room for error or escape. From across the room, one of the bikers took a hesitant step forward, his hands raised in a half-hearted attempt to intervene. "Hey, man," he stammered, "let him go." He didn't mean nothing by it. Jason glanced up, his eyes locking onto the man. "He came at me. You saw it," Jason said, his voice steady, unaffected by the chaos unfolding around him. "If you want him free, tell him to calm down first." The bartender, who had been silently watching with the phone in hand, finally spoke up. "Maybe it's time for you all to leave before this gets worse." But Hank, as one of his friends had called him, wasn't ready to back down completely. Even with his arm twisted and his face pressed to the table, he snarled through gritted teeth, "Call the cops. This guy just assaulted me. He's wearing a fake uniform and I want him arrested." Jason released him with a controlled shove and Hank stumbled forward, clutching his arm as he turned to glare at the soldier. "You'll pay for this," he growled, his voice dripping with malice. The rest of the bikers rallied behind him, emboldened by their leader's pride. One of them pulled out a phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands. Yeah, we've got a guy here impersonating a soldier, he said, his voice loud enough for everyone in the bar to hear, and he just assaulted my friend. Jason remained still, his expression calm, but his mind raced. He knew how this looked, how quickly things could spiral out of control. But he also knew he hadn't done anything wrong. His years of service, his sacrifices, everything he stood for, he could hold up against their baseless accusations. He just had to stay composed. The bar was alive with whispers now, patrons murmuring among themselves, casting sidelong glances at Jason. Some looked uneasy, others seemed quietly impressed by how effortlessly he'd handled the situation. But no one stepped forward to challenge what had happened. Outside, the sound of sirens cut through the tense air. Red and blue lights flashed against the bar's windows, casting shifting shadows across the room. The police had arrived. The door swung open, and two officers stepped into the bar. One was a broad-shouldered man with a close-cropped haircut, his expression unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. The other was a woman with sharp features and a calm, observant demeanor. Their presence immediately silenced the room as all eyes turned toward them. "We got a call about an altercation," the male officer said, his voice steady but firm. "Can someone explain what's going on here?" Hank, clutching his wrist and still red-faced from the encounter, was the first to speak. He pointed a shaky finger at Jason. "That guy assaulted me, and he's impersonating a soldier. Look at him, he doesn't even have proper boots on." The officer's gaze shifted to Jason, who stood quietly by his table, his posture relaxed but alert. "Is that true?" the officer asked, his tone neutral. Terrence shook his head slowly and met the officer's eyes. "No, sir. This man and his friends confronted me because they didn't believe I'm a real soldier. When he tried to grab me, I defended myself." The female officer stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room. "Did anyone witness what happened?" she asked, her voice carrying a calm authority. The bartender spoke up, breaking the tense silence. "I saw it. Hank went after him first. That soldier just reacted to protect himself. It wasn't an assault." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. One patron near the jukebox added, "Yeah, he didn't start anything. Hank's been on edge since he walked in." The male officer turned back to Terrence. "Do you have any proof of your service, sir?" Terrence nodded, keeping his movements measured, as he gestured toward the duffel bag on the floor by his table. "In that bag, I've got my service uniform with my name and rank. I also have my ID and my wallet. You're welcome to take a look." The officer retrieved the bag and carefully opened it, pulling out the neatly folded uniform adorned with badges and insignias. He inspected it briefly before turning to his partner, who nodded in quiet confirmation. "You're clear," the male officer said, his voice firm but respectful. "We appreciate your cooperation." Hank, still nursing his bruised pride, growled, "You're just going to take his word for it?" He could have faked all that. The female officer shot Hank a sharp look. "Enough. From what I've heard, you instigated this, and you're lucky he's not pressing charges against you for assault." The words hit Hank like a slap, and his bluster began to deflate. The other bikers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. "Here's how this is going to go," the male officer continued. "We're filing a report about this incident. If you want to pursue your claims, you're welcome to do so. But you should know that false accusations are a serious matter." Hank opened his mouth to respond, but closed it again, realizing he was cornered. The officer stepped back, scanning the room one last time as the tension began to ease. The female officer turned to Terrence. "Thank you for keeping your cool. We'll make sure this is documented correctly." Terrence gave her a small nod, his composure unshaken. "Thank you, officer." The bikers began to shuffle out of the bar, their earlier bravado replaced by awkward silence. Hank, still fuming, glared at Terrence one last time before disappearing through the door. The officers followed shortly after. Leaving the bar, the atmosphere slowly returned to its usual hum of conversation. Terrence sat back down, his drink untouched. The weight of the encounter lingered, but he was relieved it hadn't escalated further. Around him, the other patrons whispered and stole glances in his direction, their earlier wariness now replaced by quiet respect. A few days later, Terrence was working on his old pickup truck in the driveway of his small home on the outskirts of Fayetteville, North Carolina. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard as he tightened a bolt under the hood. The memory of the bar incident lingered, not because of the confrontation itself. He had faced worse in combat, but because of what it represented. It wasn't the first time someone had judged him unfairly, and he doubted it would be the last. The sound of tires crunching gravel pulled him from his thoughts. He straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag, and turned to see a motorcycle rolling into the driveway. The rider was one of the men from the bar, a wiry guy with thinning hair and a leather jacket that looked 2 sizes too big. Terrence recognized him as Bill, one of Hank's crew. Bill cut the engine and dismounted, removing his helmet and hesitating for a moment before stepping closer. His posture was cautious, almost apologetic, as if he were approaching a stray dog he didn't want to startle. "Right?" Bill asked, his voice quiet. Terrence nodded, but didn't speak, waiting to see where this was going. Bill cleared his throat and stuffed his hands into his jacket pockets. I wanted to come by and say I'm sorry for what happened at the bar." Terrence raised an eyebrow, surprised but not entirely convinced. "You were part of it," he said evenly. Bill nodded, his face flushing with guilt. "I know. I didn't stop it, and I should have. Hank, he's got a way of riling people up, and I went along with it, but that doesn't make it right. I've been thinking about it ever since, and I just wanted to tell you that." Terrence studied Bill for a moment. The man's discomfort was evident, but so was his sincerity. "Why now?" Terrence asked, his tone steady. Bill shrugged, looking down at his boots. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because, well, seeing you handle yourself the way you did made me realize how wrong we were. You didn't deserve any of that." For a long moment, Terrence said nothing. Then he sighed and leaned against the truck, crossing his arms. "What do you want from me, Bill?" "Forgiveness." Bill looked up, his eyes earnest. "Maybe. But more than that," Bill continued, his voice a little firmer now, I want to be better. I've seen a lot of hate in my life, and I don't want to add to it anymore. What we did was wrong, and I need to own up to it." Terrence's expression softened slightly. He had heard apologies before, some genuine, some hollow. This one felt different, not because of the words, but because of the effort it took for Bill to show up at all. "I appreciate you coming here," Terrence said finally, his tone steady. "It doesn't erase what happened, but it's a start." Bill nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thanks, man. I mean it." As Bill mounted his bike and started the engine, Terrence watched him go, feeling a strange mix of emotions. The incident at the bar had been an ugly reminder of the prejudice he still faced, but Bill's apology was a glimmer of hope, a small but meaningful step toward understanding. Terrence turned back to his truck, wiping his hands again as he reflected on what had unfolded over the past few days. He knew the fight against ignorance wasn't over, but he also knew he wasn't alone in it. The choices he made, the way he carried himself, could shift perspectives, one person at a time. The evening air was calm as he finished his work, the quiet punctuated by the distant hum of cicadas. Terrence felt a sense of resolve not just to keep moving forward, but to face the world with the same strength and integrity that had carried him through his service. Sometimes the battles weren't fought overseas. Sometimes they were fought right here, in bars, in homes, in hearts. And as far as Terrence was concerned, those battles mattered just as much.